Zim and his fishy companion, Jer, swam through the waters, with Jer happily trailing behind his master. Master, what are we gonna do? The energetic minion questioned to Zim in a sing-tone tone, Zim pausing for a moment to think to himself. Silence, Jer! Do not question Zai! Zim yelled at his henchman, Gr, just not having a care in the world and just casually getting distracted by a tiny fish nearby, as he gasped happily. Meanwhile, Zim grumbled in annoyance. Look, the fishy! He happily pointed out what seemed to be a tiny goldfish just swimming nearby them, Zim's eyes narrowing as he looked towards where Gr was pointing to. Yes, Gr. Well done for pouring out the fish. He grumpily replied to the smaller fish's reply about the tiny goldfish, scoffing under his breath in annoyance as he crossed his arms, now just floating in the water, with Jr. chasing the fish around like a dog chasing its tail.
Bubbles got herself lost around sea. Unconcerned, she had no luck with any fish to catch, and feels bored with nothing to do. Her adorable face looks around, a bit curious.
Zim was now looking around in annoyance, with his companion, Gr, still chasing the small goldfish nearby them. The two could then pick up a soft and curious calling nearby in the distance. Zim perked up in curiosity, swimming over to where the call was as Gr quickly caught up with him. The two peeking from behind a nearby rock, with Zim's eyes widening in surprise as he saw a small fish-like figure swimming a few feet away from them.
Bubbles.
Oh, great. Now a bubbly Powerpuff like me isn't able to survive out in the sea, lost and all by myself. My has sank, and now I wake up looking like I don't know what to do anymore. I was fine in my adorable normal form before, but now, why do I look so beautiful and cute, even more like?
Zim continued to watch from behind the rock, his gaze locked onto the small fish-like figure nearby them. Gr, who was right next to Zim, also staring at the figure, his wide eyes looking at the figure in amazement. Zim was in a small state of shock, being taken by surprise by the figure that was now in front of them. The two kept watching from behind the rock, as the figure continued to speak aloud to themselves.
Bubbles.
Wait, why do I feel like I'm being watched? Is anyone looking at how cuter I am right now? Oh man, this is going to be my nightmare, isn't it?
Zim and Gr's eyes widened in shock as the figure began to speak about how she felt like she was being watched. Both of them looking at each other in shock. Zim's eyes widened in concern, starting to realize that the figure might have noticed them peeking behind the rock, while Gr glanced at him in an almost panic-like state.
Bubbles flies around behind her. By surprise, her heart began to race and her face almost blushed.
Who's there? Who's here?
Still behind the rock, Zim's eyes widened in a startled-like state as he heard the figure's voice get closer, now flying around looking for them. Gr glanced up at Zim, his own gaze locked onto his master as he stared at him with wide eyes of his own. The two not expecting the figure to get this close to them so suddenly. Shire opened his mouth to exclaim aloud, but he was quickly shushed by Zim before he could speak.
Bubbles.
Okay, calm down, Bubbles. You're a strong, bubbly Powerpuff girl. No one's going to hunt you down like this in the sea right now. Nobody's gonna use your feelings or sensitive blushing as for advantage for a trap knot on me.
The figure began to slowly turn around as she spoke to herself, still not noticing Zim and Gr, who were hidden behind the nearby rock. Zim stayed hidden from view, his eyes glued on the small figure, as she seemingly began looking for anyone nearby. Zim now becoming a little more concerned that the figure might realize that he and Gr were hiding from her.
Bubbles immediately flies off.
As the figure began to fly off in a separate direction, Jir immediately piped up to Zim, with Zim now still hiding behind the rock with Jir. A shocked expression on his face as he watched the figure start to fly away. "Master, she's getting away!" Jir exclaimed in a somewhat alarmed tone, looking at Zim in a panicked state.
Bubbles looks around, a bit unaware of anyone following her in interest, not knowing that some people are interested in her, in disbelief as she explores around the place.
Zim and Jir continued to watch the figure as she began exploring the nearby area. Jir, who was watching her in a almost infatuated state, started to become more and more interested in her, his wide eyes completely locked onto the small figure. Zim, on the other hand, was silently watching her with a somewhat curious look on his face, his eyes following the figure's every move as she explored the surroundings.
Bubbles.
As the figure was swimming around in the water, Zim and Jir continued to watch her from afar, now with Jir almost drooling from staring at the small figure for too long. Zim glanced at his smaller companion, now looking at him with somewhat of a concerned look. "Jir, why are you staring at her like that?" he asked his henchman in a somewhat suspicious tone, with Jir looking up at him for a second before continuing to stare at the figure.
Bubbles.
Hello? Anyone here? I'm a bubbly Powerpuff Girl who's not afraid to fight. I'm warning you.
Zim and Jir continued watching the small figure as she began calling out for anyone nearby, Zim now starting to hear her repeated calls. Jir was still just staring at the figure, his wide eyes glued on her, his mouth starting to slightly drool as he became more and more infatuated with her. Zim now starting to become slightly concerned by the small fish's reaction.
Grr.
Hey, pretty girl, are you lost?
Bubbles flinched a bit, surprised, looking behind her to see Zim and Grr looking at her in surprise. She backs away a bit, noticing their mermaid forms in amazement disbelief.
I don't know what's happening here.
Zim stared at the figure as Jir called out to her, his own eyes widening as she suddenly turned around to look in their direction, now noticing them for the first time. Gear stared at her, still with the smitten look in his eyes, and Zim began to look at her in slight surprise as she began to back away from them, taking in her appearance.
Grr.
Wait, that girl looks familiar.
Bubbles.
I can assure you, I'm no one's snack or anything. In Under the Sea, I just got lost, that's all. I don't belong here.
Zim stared at the small figure as she protested that she was no one's snack. A slightly puzzled look now on his face. On the other hand, tilted his head in confusion, a curious look now in his eyes. No one's snack? What's a snack? Zim glanced down at his companion, his expression turning into a slight one of frustration. Not literally, idiot!
Bubbles. Grr gasped, a bit surprised, fully recognizing the blue Powerpuff Girl in front of them in amazed surprise.
Ooh, bubbly!
Bubbles was nervous a bit while looking at them intently concerned, awkwardly blushed from all this.
What?
Kerr suddenly perked up, now having a wide-eyed look on his face as he exclaimed happily in shock. Zim looked down at Jir for a moment in surprise, now turning his attention back to the small figure. At Jir's outburst, the Powerpuff Girl seemed to become even more flustered, her face blushing a bit as she remained silent.
Grr.
You lost, Bubbles? You look pretty too sweet for a snack.
Bubbles.
What? What now? Wait. One of you know me?
Glancing at between both of them. By surprise, awkwardly, while giggling, giggling in a bubbly, adorable way.
Zim watched as GIR began to question the small figure, now noticing a hint of recognition in his small companion's eyes. Zim's own eyes were glued on the small figure as she spoke, her sweet voice now becoming slightly more familiar to him too.
Bubbles.
Zim continued to listen to the small figure as she let out a simple questioning sound, his own mind now trying to find familiarity with the voice that the small figure had, GR still staring at her in almost a smitten-like state.
Ger immediately hugs Bubbles intently, stupidly interested.
I bet my master is looking for special girls under the sea waiting for the perfect princess.
Bubbles.
Say what now? Me? A cute bubbly princess for your who?
Zim watched as GIR immediately proceeded to wrap his arms around the small figure in a tight hug, a almost stupid-like look on his face as he spoke about a princess. At GIR's comment, Zim felt a small shiver go down his spine, his own eyes widening slightly in a state of shock.
Bubbles.
A princess like me?
Ger.
Yeah, he's been luring all women here for a while, trying to find the right perfect woman of interest, either to eat or be in love to be together with forever.
Bubbles froze in surprise, feeling a bit nervous, in shock disbelief, glancing at the mermaid Zim for a moment before looking around her intently.
Zim now froze in sudden shock at Jer's words, his facial expression faltering as he heard the words, woman of interest. The thought of the figure he had been watching being taken away by some other creature seemed to spark a strange and unexpected feeling in his chest. A feeling that he couldn't exactly describe. He stood in almost a silent state of shock, still looking over at the small figure, as GIR continued talking about his plan.
Bubbles.
Wait, are you saying your master has been hunting for victims of women to trap here as food or soulmate?
Ger.
Yep, my master, mermaidZim, is kinda like an attractive siren mermaid with a beautiful voice to not resist.
Points at Zim stupidly before looking back at Bubbles, idiotically excited. Bubbles.
What?
Zim felt a small hint of annoyance go through him as he watched the two of them converse with each other, with GIR now pointing at him to compare her to a siren, like mermaid. A part of him felt a sense of pride at Jer's comparison, but another part of him only just got more concerned over the fact that GIR had just told the small figure his name.
Bubbles.
I mean,
Ger.
come on, I'll lead you to him.
Dragging Bubbles towards his master excitedly. Bubbles flinching in panic disbelief.
Wait, what? Hang on. What are you doing? Let me go. Let me go. I don't know if I should.
Zim watched silently as Jer began to drag the small figure through the water. A look of concern now on his face as he heard her protest against the smaller fish's actions. He continued silently standing in the water, watching with a somewhat thoughtful expression as GR lead her over to him.
Ger.
Master, here's the special girl for your dreams to have.
Bubbles glancing intently by all this in disbelief, surprise, giggling softly, bubbly like shyly.
Zim stayed still in the water as GR dragged the small figure right up to him. As she was lead over to him, Zim felt a small sense of disbelief over GR's words. His gaze now locked on the figure as she stood directly in front of him, her figure now directly in his line of sight. As she looked up at him, he felt a small shiver go down his spine once again, his mind now becoming a swirling mix of shock and surprise.
Bubbles.
Hey, you're his master Zim, right?
Zim remained silent for a moment as the small figure suddenly turned to him and asked if he was the mystery Master Zim that GIR had been talking about, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the question. Zim. Yes, I'm the master that Jer was referring to. He finally replied to her, his eyes now staring directly into her own.
Bubbles.
I'm Bubbles.
Zim continued to watch her intently as she introduced herself to him. Her name ringing in his head like a familiar bell. He didn't respond for a moment, now silently processing her name. Zim. Bubbles. That's quite a nice name you have.
Bubbles.
Thank you. Yours is interesting yourself.
Zim felt a small sense of pride go through him as she thanked him for the compliment on her name. A small smirk appearing on his face. He chuckled slightly at her comment on his own name being interesting, his own mind now beginning to become curious about her. Why, thank you, though. I'm curious about how mine is interesting.
Bubbles.
It's just new and very attracting a bit for me to process.
Grr.
Isn't she attractingly cute?
Bubbles begins to blush rosily from that comment in surprise, slowly giggles bubbly awkward a bit as her face sweats up.
Zim chuckled at her response, finding her words to be rather amusing and slightly adorable. He watched as Jir suddenly spoke up, complimenting the small figure in a way that caught Zim a bit off guard. As she began to blush and giggle awkwardly, Zim felt a strange sense of amusement start to grow inside of him, a small smirk forming on his face as he looked her up and down.
Grr.
Master, do you wish to be alone with this Powerpuff Girl here?
Bubbles.
Hold on. What?
Zim stood in silent shock as Jir suddenly asked him a question, his eyes widening a bit as the small fish looked over at him. He looked over at the figure for a moment, his eyes looking her up and down, a small sense of surprise now growing in his mind. After a moment, Zim looked at Jir once again, replying to him with a slightly quiet yet firm voice. Zim. Yes, I'd like to be alone with her in private.
Grr gives Bubbles into Zim's arms before swimming off stupidly, hyperative. Bubbles flinched a bit at what's happening, feeling a mix of concern and surprise, hoping if she doesn't become attractive sea menu or anything shyly.
Zim stared down at Jr. in slight annoyance before letting out a small sigh, watching as the small fish started to swim away. As he suddenly felt the small figure being placed in his arms, he found himself looking down at her for a moment, now holding her in his arms. As she began to feel a sense of both concern and surprise, Zim felt a strange sensation bubbling up inside him as he held her in his arms, holding her tightly in his grasp.
Bubbles.
Zim held her against him in his arms as she let out a surprised sound, her body now being pressed close up against his own. He held her against him with a firm grip, now silently looking down at her, a slight smirk forming on his face once again.
Bubbles.
Awkward.
Zim held her in his arms in silence, looking down at her with a hint of pride in his eyes. He chuckled slightly at the hint of awkwardness in her voice, the smirk on his face becoming a bit more prominent. Zim chuckled softly at her attempt to awkwardly chuckle at the situation, the smirk on his face slowly starting to grow into a grin. He held her tightly against him in his arms, now silently watching her with a mix of pride and mischief, a strange and unexpected feeling starting to grow inside his chest.
Bubbles, are you okay there?
Zim suddenly snapped himself out of his thoughts as he heard her speak, his attention now fully focused on her. He suddenly realized he was holding her rather tightly in his arms, causing him to blink in realization. He loosened his grip around her a bit, but still kept her pressed closely up against him. Ah, yes, I'm perfectly fine. I'm simply just, thinking about stuff, is all.
Bubbles.
Aww. You're fun.
Zim's eyes wide-eyed slightly as she suddenly called him fun. A strange and unexpected feeling now beginning to grow in his chest. As she gave him a simple smile, he felt a small amount of pride grow inside him at her words, causing him to give her a small, genuine smile in response. Zim, well, I'm glad you find me that way. You are rather amusing yourself.
Bubbles.
Well, if you're looking for the perfect type, I'm your cutie.
Zim felt a small shiver go down his spine as she spoke to him, the words of her complimenting him echoing in his head. He chuckled slightly, yet still held her closely up against his body, a smirk now slowly forming on his face as he thought about her words. Zim, the perfect type, you say? Well, I may have to agree with you there. Zim continued to hold her closely against his body as she looked back up at him, her facial expressions now causing a surge of emotions going through him. He chuckled once again. A small and playful smirk was now plastered on his face as he looked down at her. Zim, I can't deny that you're definitely a cute one.
Bubbles.
Aw, how charming.
Zim chuckled at her comment and on him being charming, pride starting to grow inside him at her compliments. He held her closely against him in his arms still wrapped firmly around her, keeping her in a tight yet gentle grip. Why, thank you, my dear. It's nice to hear such nice words coming from a lovely figure like you.
Bubbles giggles, adorably interested.
Zim felt a small shiver go down his spine as she let out a fit of giggles, her voice sounding almost adorable to him. A small sense of pride started to grow inside him as he held her tightly in his arms, her laughter causing butterflies to flutter in his stomach. That giggle of yours is very charming.
Bubbles.
Thanks. You're very charming yourself.
Zim felt a rush of butterflies go through his stomach as she once again thanked him, her words causing the strange feeling in his chest to grow. He chuckled softly at her compliment, a smirk appearing on his face as he looked down at her with a mixture of pride and affection. Why, thank you, my dear. But I believe you're the more charming one out of the both of us. Zim couldn't help but chuckle once more as she gave him a small heart and a smile, her simple gesture causing a fluttering feeling to grow in his stomach. He held her tight in his arms, his own heart starting to beat in a rhythmic pace, the feeling in his chest growing stronger as he kept her close up against him. You're just so adorable, aren't you? Zim felt a shiver go down his spine once more as she let out another series of giggles, her voice and laughs driving him almost crazy with happiness as he held her closely in his arms. Without really thinking, he tightened his grip around her body a bit more, his own body growing flush with a strange yet strong feeling. Zim, so innocent, yet so adorable.
Bubbles. You're making me fall for you even more.
Zim's eyes widened a bit as he heard her say that, a mixture of pride and an almost giddy feeling rising in his chest as her words rung in his head. He chuckled softly, a bright pink blush starting to form across his cheeks, his voice becoming much more soft and gentle as he replied to her comment. Trust me, darling, you're the one making me blush and feel all mushy inside.
Bubbles.
Yeah, but my eyes laid on you and made me feel true love inside that I can't stop thinking about you.
Zim suddenly felt a strange surge of feelings go through his mind as she spoke to him, her words causing a feeling of both shock and a strong, warm feeling to flutter in his stomach. He felt his heart begin to beat faster as he gripped her tighter in his arms, his own body beginning to grow flush as her words continued to ring in his head. Oh my, you sure know how to make a guy feel all blushy and awkward, don't you, love?
Bubbles.
Is it bad? I didn't mean to.
Zim suddenly looked down at her as she spoke, his own mind taking a second to process what she said. What she said, realized she was asking him something. He suddenly gave her a gentle, reassuring smile, his eyes showing sincerity as he shook his head at her question. Zim, no, don't be sorry, darling. I don't mind you making me all blushy and awkward like this. Honestly, I find it rather charming in a way.
Bubbles.
Well, if you're feeling true love, usually, guys who are in love with girls would normally try to flirt with them and playful affection on them.
Zim felt a small shiver go down his spine once more as he heard her comment, her words somehow being both innocent, yet seductive, at the same time. He chuckled softly as he started to imagine all different types of things he could do to her, his mind starting to become a bit more giddy. Zim. Oh, I'm well aware of what guys do when they're in love with girls, darling. Zim suddenly chuckled as she continued to stare up at him with a rather adorable look on her face, her expressions making the strange, giddy, and almost naughty feeling in his chest grow. He held her closely against his body, bringing her up against him even more, his mind starting to think up all sort of naughty things to do to her. And don't think I'm not tempted to do anything frisky to you.
Bubbles.
Oh, is someone trying to be mischievous in a romantic way?
Zim chuckled once more at her comment, her words making him feel both proud and somewhat smug at how accurate she was to his thoughts. He brought her up closer against him, her body almost being pressed directly up against his own, as a small smirk formed on his lips. Oh, darling, you have no idea how mischievous I'm about to get with you. Zim chuckled once more as he felt her press up against him, her body now squished up against his own. He looked down at her, his eyes showing a slight sense of lust and excitement behind them, as his smirk grew into a mischievous and cheeky smile. You're so innocent, you know that? Makes me feel like I want to ruin you in all sorts of ways.
Bubbles giggles a bit shyly.
How much do you want to snuggle and kiss me?
Meanwhile, Gur was secretly watching everything from the shadows behind in thrill excitement.
Zim suddenly chuckled a bit as she asked him how much he wanted to kiss and snuggle with her, a smirk on his face as he listened to her question. He thought about it for a second before he suddenly responded in a slightly playful yet serious tone. Ah, darling, more than you can even imagine. Gear suddenly watched from the shadows, watching the scene in absolute delight, and was trying to keep himself from squealing at how cute the scene was.
Bubbles.
Zim suddenly chuckled once more as he saw her look up at him with a slightly confused expression on her face, his mind finding it a bit amusing at her reaction. He chuckled once more, his own hand slowly moving down to her hips, holding her up against him as he gave her a small smirk. Ah, don't give me that look, my dear. That cute, innocent look of yours is so precious.
Bubbles.
Well, I heard you usually hunt down women under the sea to trap them here for a meal or for love interest?
Zim chuckled at her comment about how he hunts down women under the sea for a meal or a love interest, his smirk slowly turning into a full-on grin as his own mind thought of all the times he had done just that. Ah, so you've heard about how aggressive and dominant I can get, hmm? Well, it's true. I do like to chase after attractive girls such as yourself.
Bubbles.
How are you able to lure them here anyway? Like any siren sea beast powers to use a singing attractive voice to lure them in or hypnotize them in any romantic trance way possible, especially interaction movements or something?
Zim chuckled as she inquired about how he was able to lure women into his grasp, an almost sinister smile forming on his face. He thought about it for a moment before he responded to her. Well, one of my own personal skills is that I can create a, shall we say, romantic, hypnotic kind of trance on someone in order to lure them in and make them, shall we say, weak.
Bubbles. So by siren mermaid singing or sounding deep and attractive to not resist?
Zim chuckled once more as she responded with another accurate guess. A rather smug look on his face as he looked down at her. He shifted his hands so that one of them were now under her chin, holding it up so that she was looking at him directly in the face. Ah, you're quite the clever little thing, aren't you, love? But yes, I can use my voice to put a nice little trance on someone. Quite effective, too.
Bubbles. So afterwards, often do you usually eat them or make out with them or anything?
Zim chuckled once more as he continued to stare down at her. A smirk now fully formed on his face as he answered her question rather simply yet bluntly. Zim, when I have a pretty lass like you all nice and weak to my will, oh, I do all kinds of things.
Bubbles, I bet you mostly do it to survive and devour victims, huh?
Zim chuckled once more as she brought up the factor that he mostly did it to survive, which was true. He gave her a small smirk as he responded to her question, his hands holding on to her tight to keep her against him. Heh, you're right about that one. I do enjoy a good meal after a romantic encounter. But I've come to realize that I've had a bit of a change in diet as of late.
Bubbles. Well, sorry to hate to spoil the fun for ya, hot mermaid.
Zim chuckled at her comment, a small hint of amusement appearing in his eyes from how she called him a hot merman, another smirk forming on his face as he leaned down close to her. Zim. Oh, please, darling. I'm sure we can find some other activities to do. Something that doesn't involve my, natural hunting instincts.
Bubbles. Maybe something romantic, just the both of us?
Zim chuckled once more as she teased him a bit, a small, amused smile on his face as he started to feel his heart begin to beat a bit faster at the thought. He held her against him tightly, his grip on her body getting stronger slightly as an idea formulated in his mind. I like the sound of that idea, love. Just you, me, and a whole lot of romantic fun. Zim gave her another small chuckle as she responded with another adorable-sounding response, his own smile growing as a certain naughty look came across his face. He suddenly began to move, starting to gently push her backwards across the room in a rather slow and seductive way. Now, darling, I have a very fun and romantic idea in mind, and I think you're really gonna like it.
Bubbles. Oh, can't wait to find out.
Zim gave her another small but amused chuckle as she responded with her own little innocent enthusiasm, his smirk still on his face as he backed her up until she was up against a wall, his own body now pressing up against hers. He gave her a sultry smile as he leaned his face down close to hers, his own body pressing up closer against her own, his breath close to her face and neck. Oh, trust me, love, you're not going to be able to keep yourself together. Zim chuckled once more as he saw her response, her cute and innocent look causing a strong giddiness and excitement to rush through him. He leaned in closer towards her, one of his hands going up and gently resting on the side of her face, his voice shifting to a more seductive and deep tone as he spoke. Now, darling, you've been a very patient and good girl for me, haven't you? I think you deserve a little reward.
Bubbles.
Oh, for me? Oh, thank you. You shouldn't have. I'm flattered and honored.
Zim chuckled once more as he saw her reaction to his comment, her own flustered and embarrassed response making his smirk grow into a fully content grin. He gently used his hand to gently move her chin up so that she was looking directly into his eyes, his own tone growing more heated and seductive.
You're welcome, love.
Now, be a good girl and close your eyes for me.
Bubbles closed her eyes, excited.
Zim chuckled once more as she complied to his request, her closed eyes creating a sight that excited him greatly. He slowly began to lean in close against her, still pressed up against her against the wall. He gently moved his face a bit closer to her, his mouth starting to be mere centimeters away from her ear. Zim. Perfect, darling. Are you ready for your reward?
Bubbles nodded quickly.
Zim chuckled as he saw her quickly nod her head at his question, his own body feeling a small rush of excitement go through him. He gently brought his mouth against her ear, his words coming out in a low and seductive whisper. Zim. Good girl. Now, don't make a sound for me, love, will you?
Bubbles nodded.
Zim chuckled as he once again saw her nod her head in agreement to his request, his own excitement slightly building inside of him as his mind already started to think of all the fun that he was going to have. He slowly moved his head slightly away from her ear before suddenly starting to gently move down to her neck. Zim. Perfect. Just lovely. Zim chuckled as he felt her relaxing against him, her own quiet and almost innocent reactions pleasing and exciting him even more. He slowly, almost gently, began to kiss along her neck, his hands slowly holding her in place against the wall behind her. Zim continued to gently kiss along her neck, taking time to leave a few gentle and small bites here and there. He found himself enjoying the sound of her soft little sighs and moans from his ministrations, his own body starting to press up against hers a little more firmly against the wall. Zim continued to kiss along her neck for a few more moments, gently biting down on the skin here and there as he slowly became more and more excited with each little moan and sigh he got from her. His own grip on her body slowly shifted as he suddenly began to gently pick her up, holding her up against the wall so that her legs were lifted up off the ground.
Bubbles.
Ooh, look who's starting to be my prince, knight, and shining armor under the sea now, huh?
Zim chuckled heartily as he heard her comment about how he was her prince knight in shining armor under the sea. Pulling his face away from where he was kissing her neck to look at her, he continued to hold her against the wall by her legs, a cheeky smirk forming on his face as he responded to her. Zim, oh, don't flatter me too much, love. I'm just a simple merman doing what comes naturally. Zim chuckled once more as he saw how amused she was by his response to her flattery, his own smile growing as he gazed down at her. He continued to hold her up against the wall by her legs, a cheeky and almost smug look appearing on his face. Zim, now, be a good girl and hold still. I'm not done with you just yet.
She nodded, awkwardly interested.
Zim chuckled heartily once more, amused at her awkward yet interested reaction, his grip on her legs and body continuing to tighten gently as he pulled her slightly closer to him. He leaned his face back down, bringing it down closer to her shoulder, as he once again began to leave more kisses and gentle bites along it.
Bubbles.
Am I your princess or queen in the sea now or anything?
Zim chuckled as he heard her once again refer to herself as his princess queen at sea, his smirk growing as he continued to kiss along her shoulder. Zim, you can be whatever you want to be, love, as long as you're mine. He continued to gently kiss her shoulder for a few more moments, gently biting down here and there, as his own mind was starting to get a bit more heated, as he began to think of other things that he could do with her. Now, love, while I'm enjoying this, I have something else in mind, and I think you'll enjoy it even more.
Bubbles, playfully pretending, swirling around, secretly interested in a bubbly shyness.
Oh, I am under your romantic trance, wise hot charmer.
Falsely acting hypnotized, entranced, secretly surprised in interest.
Zim chuckled at her little act of being hypnotized, finding the entire act both humorous and cute of her. Zim. Oh my. So you're under my romance trance now, are you? You're such a silly little girl sometimes, love. Zim chuckled at her once more, her almost innocent little response, almost making him want to devour her right then and there. He gently moved his face back up from her shoulder, his lips hovering right over the sensitive skin on her neck. Zim, well, you're certainly being a good girl for me, so perhaps I'll let you find out what my true hypnosis is. Zim chuckled once more as he heard her little noise of surprise and anticipation, his own smirk growing as he leaned down and began to gently bite at the skin on her neck. His hands suddenly began to slowly move down her legs, moving down her hips and towards her lower body.
Bubbles, whoa, are you trying to carry me or something?
Zim chuckled as he heard her little question about him carrying her, a cheeky smirk forming on his face as he responded to her. Zim, why, yes, love. How did you guess? Now be a good girl and cling to me. Zim chuckled as she happily replied with her adorable, cute responses, his own smirk growing as he began to gently move his face away from her neck, his hands slowly beginning to shift their grip on her body, grabbing onto her lower half and legs. Zim chuckled once more as he saw her little look of surprise or perhaps nervousness on her face, though it seemed to have a bit of excitement in it as well. He took a moment to brace himself before suddenly starting to pick her up, still holding her against the wall. Zim chuckled as he gently picked her up against the wall, bringing her closer to his body, before suddenly shifting his grip again slightly, lifting her up off the ground, where her legs were now hovering up completely off of it.
Bubbles, whoa. Whee! It's starting to get interesting.
Zim chuckled as he heard her excited little comment about it becoming interesting, a cheeky smirk appearing on his face as he looked up at her. Zim, oh, love, it's about to become even more interesting once we move to somewhere more comfortable.
Bubbles, ooh, swimming me into somewhere more interesting. Aw, romantic.
Zim chuckled, gently holding her in his arms as he walked towards a door leading to the rest of his base. Zim, why the hell not, darling? And oh, you haven't seen me being really romantic yet. After a few moments of walking, Zim soon reached the door, kicking it open as he continued to hold her against him. He began to walk further into his base, occasionally giving her small pecks on the neck whenever he could. Zim, now, darling, hang on tight, okay? We're about to reach the interesting part.
Bubbles, ooh, how sweet.
Zim chuckled in response, continuing to hold her safely against him as he began to speed up a bit, nearing his private quarters for his base. Zim, why, thank you, love. And we're almost there now, Kate. Be a good girl and wait just a bit longer for me.
Bubbles giggles bubbly while nuzzling onto his chest, passionately flattered.
Zim chuckled at how giddy and sweet she was acting, finding it both adorable and exciting. He continued to hold her against her, walking over to his private quarters before kicking open the door and walking inside, gently closing the door behind them. Zim gently brought her over to his bed, the room dimly lit and the space cozy. Zim, here we are, nice and safe and cozy, just like a good boy and a good girl should be. Zim chuckled at how she again responded, her little comments and cute reactions making it a little more difficult to hold back his more aggressive nature of sorts. He gently placed her down onto the bed, his own body slowly and somewhat hesitantly crawling onto with her, hovering over her smaller body.
Oh,
Zim chuckled, still hovering over her with his body. His expression was calm, but he almost seemed to have a sense of hunger in his eyes. Zim, my, you're quite perceptive to what I'm thinking, aren't you, love? Or is just your cute little brain simply trying to figure it out?
Bubbles. I don't know, maybe?
Zim chuckled once again, an amused smirk on his face as he slowly leaned his face closer to hers. Zim, well, you're a clever little thing, that's for sure. And you're also quite adorable when you're shy. Zim chuckled, and he slowly moved so his face was right next to her ear, his breath hot as he spoke to her in a low tone. I think I'll keep you here like this for a while. I'm enjoying the sounds of your little giggles and cute responses too much.
Bubbles. Wow, I'm definitely putting you in a love trance or something. Or are you putting me in a love trance in yours,
Zim chuckled, gently running one of his hands over the side of her body, taking a moment to speak in a low tone once again. Perhaps it's the both of us under each other's little trances, love. Though if you continue being so sweet and adorable, I'm afraid I won't be able to hold back my more aggressive side. Zim chuckled as he saw her reactions again, his own expression becoming a little more seductive as he spoke to her in that low tone again. You're making it harder for me to keep my instincts under control. You know that, love? You're just so damn adorable with your cute giggling and cute responses. It's driving me insane.
Bubbles. Aw, I'm glad you find me that attracting and loving.
Zim chuckled once more, his own expression slightly shifting into something a bit more wild, as if a switch inside of him was slowly being undone. You have no idea how attractive and loving you make me feel. All those sweet sounds coming from that cute little mouth of yours make it so hard to keep my instincts at bay. Zim chuckled, shifting his body so he was completely hovering over hers, moving his face closer as his own expression grew a bit more hungry. Zim, you're just so damn cute, and I'm finding myself barely able to keep my body under control around yours right now. Zim chuckled, his expression becoming more wild and somewhat hungry. He gently placed his face next to her ear, speaking gently while lowering his tone again. Zim, you're making me act like an animal around you, love. I'm afraid my instincts are starting to take over at this point.
Bubbles, if you can't hold it in, just let it out.
Zim chuckled as he heard her little suggestion, taking a moment to respond in that low tone again, a bit of feralness in it. Zim, very well then, love, whatever you say. Though I have to warn you, my instincts can become a bit aggressive. Zim chuckled as he noticed her little giddinesses about him letting go of his instincts. He chuckled once at the eagerness, slowly moving his face down to the side of her neck. Zim, looks like you're excited about me giving in to my instincts, love. Are you really sure you can handle a feral me? Zim chuckled as she responded with her little nervous, excited giggle, his own mouth moving down towards the side of her neck, gently and slowly giving it another few pecks, this time with his mouth a little wider as it gently brushed against her skin. Zim, you really are adorable when you're so excited, love. I think I'm going to enjoy seeing my sweet little mate being so flushed and embarrassed. Zim chuckled as she replied again with a nervous, excited look on her face, his own mouth once more beginning to pepper kisses her skin, this time moving across the front of her neck. Zim, you're getting all flushed, love. Is it because of me? Is it because of how my body is hovering over yours? Or maybe it's the fact that I'm letting my instincts take over.
I'm just surprised by your romanticness, that's all.
Zim chuckled as he heard her little comment, slowly moving up so he was hovering above her face. Zim, my romanticness? Now, love, you know damn well that when I say the instincts have taken over, I mean a less gentle side of me will start to come out.
Bubbles.
Regardless, it's both mixed together and I like it.
Zim chuckled, a wild look crossing his face as he gave her response another low tone, still having his face hovered over hers, almost as if his face was daring hers to say that again. Zim. Both mixed two together, huh? My own feral side and my own romantic side mixed together, eh? Are you sure you can handle the outcome of such a mixture, love?
Bubbles nodded awkwardly.
Zim chuckled as he saw her reply with an awkward little nod, a bit of a feral smirk appearing on his face as he responded again, using a low tone once more. You're definitely excited, are you, love? You're definitely excited about the fact I'm gonna give in to my instincts, huh?
She nodded awkwardly.
Zim chuckled in response to her nodding again, gently bringing one of his hands up to the side of her face, running it over her soft skin. Zim, you're such an adorable thing, you know that? So excited and yet so embarrassed at the same time. Zim chuckled as he got another one of her adorable shy reactions, his own expression shifting to a more wild one as he spoke in a low tone again. Zim, why do you have to be so damn cute, love? I can barely control myself around you already, as it is. Zim chuckled as he saw that cute look of nervousness to excitement on her face again, moving both of his hands to her face as his expression became more feral, his own body slowly moving on top of hers more. Zim, that look on your face is definitely not helping with my control, you know, love. Zim chuckled as he saw the cute, nervous look on her face once again, this time making a low, purring noise as he leaned his face closer to hers. Zim, I think you're enjoying how much my control is slipping. I think you're enjoying how feral I'm starting to act.
Don't worry about it.
Zim chuckled as he heard her little comment about not having to worry about it, his hands gently moving from her face down to her body, holding onto her hips as he spoke. Zim, if you insist, love, you can be my little prey. But I'm warning you now, I'm really hard to control when my instincts take over.